Students who got expelled for helping a family member during school hours? What happened? I got expelled from Lincoln Preparatory Academy 3 weeks before graduation for leaving campus to help my little sister. Not for fighting, not for drugs, not for cheating on exams. For being a sister when nobody else could be. The zero-tolerance attendance policy at Lincoln Prep stated that any unauthorized absence during school hours resulted in automatic disciplinary action, and accumulating more than 3 unexcused absences in a semester triggered expulsion proceedings regardless of academic standing or extenuating circumstances. I'd read that policy handbook cover to cover freshman year because my guidance counselor made every scholarship student memorize the rules that could cost us our free education. 4 years of straight A's, perfect behavior, and Model UN awards meant nothing the day I walked off campus without permission to help my sister avoid getting jumped by girls who'd been threatening her for weeks. The administration saw it as defiance of authority. I saw it as choosing family over a rule that didn't account for real-life emergencies. My name is Kira Okafor, and I was 17 years old with college acceptance letters from 3 universities when everything fell apart. Lincoln Prep was one of those prestigious charter schools that pulled high-achieving students from struggling neighborhoods and promised them a path to elite colleges if they followed every rule without question. The trade-off seemed worth it when I started freshman year, coming from a middle school where metal detectors and police officers were normal parts of daily life. Lincoln had small classes, college prep curriculum, and a track record of sending 90% of graduates to 4-year universities. What they didn't advertise was how rigid their behavioral expectations were, or how quickly they'd throw you out if you became inconvenient. The school operated on a merit-based enrollment system where your spot was never truly secure, and administrators reminded us constantly that hundreds of students would gladly take our place if we couldn't handle the academic and behavioral standards. My little sister Imani was 14 and attended the neighborhood public school 5 blocks from our apartment. She'd wanted to apply to Lincoln Prep too, but our mother couldn't handle the complicated application process while working 2 jobs and managing her worsening anxiety disorder. Imani was smart and funny and way too trusting for her own good, which made her an easy target for the kinds of girls who enjoyed making other people miserable. The problem started in October when Imani accidentally bumped into someone in the cafeteria and made them spill juice on their new shoes. The girl, whose name was Destiny, according to Imani, decided this minor accident warranted weeks of harassment and threats. She'd corner Imani in the bathroom to tell her she was going to get beat up after school, or send her friends to shove her in the hallways between classes. Imani tried telling teachers, but they said they couldn't do anything without proof of actual violence. I first learned about the situation when Imani called me crying during my chemistry class in early November. She'd hidden in a bathroom stall because Destiny and 3 other girls were waiting outside the school to jump her, and she was too scared to leave. My phone was on silent during class, so I didn't see the call until lunch period an hour later. By then, Imani had called our mother 6 times, but Mom was working at the nursing home and couldn't leave her shift. I called Imani back from the cafeteria and talked her through sneaking out a side entrance and taking a different route home, and I thought the situation was handled. That evening, Mom said we needed to talk to the school about getting Imani transferred, or getting the other girls suspended for harassment. But when Mom called the next day to set up a meeting, the secretary said the earliest available appointment with a counselor was 3 weeks out. 3 weeks for my sister to keep getting threatened and harassed with no protection. The threats escalated through November, with Destiny posting things on social media about what she was going to do to Imani when she finally caught her. Screenshots showed detailed descriptions of violence, and several of Destiny's friends commented encouraging her and offering to help. Imani saved everything and brought it to her vice principal, who said that social media wasn't under school jurisdiction, and there was nothing they could do about posts made outside school hours. The vice principal suggested Imani just avoid the other girls and not engage with them, as if my 14-year-old sister had any control over when and where she got ambushed in the hallways. The helplessness of watching this happen while administrators did nothing made me furious. I started walking Imani to and from school when my schedule allowed, but Lincoln Prep's hours didn't always line up with her school's dismissal time, and I couldn't be there every day without risking my own attendance record. In early December, Imani called me during my calculus class absolutely hysterical. Through her sobs, I pieced together that Destiny and her friends had cornered her in the locker room after gym class and threatened to beat her up after school that day. They'd taken her phone so she couldn't call for help and told her they'd be waiting by the front entrance to make sure she couldn't escape. Imani had borrowed another girl's phone to call me, and she was hiding in the nurse's office claiming she felt sick. The school nurse knew something was wrong but couldn't do anything except let Imani stay there until the end of the day. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Mom was unreachable at work until at least 4 o'clock, and Imani's school let out at 2:45. I had 90 minutes to figure out how to get my sister home safely while sitting in calculus class at a school with a zero-tolerance policy for leaving campus. I raised my hand and asked my teacher, Mr. Phillips, if I could go to the office because of a family emergency. He asked what kind of emergency, and I explained my sister was in danger and needed help getting home from school. Mr. Phillips looked sympathetic but said I couldn't leave campus without parent permission and suggested I call my mother to handle it. I explained my mother was at work and couldn't leave, and he said I should talk to my guidance counselor about the situation after class ended. After class would be too late. Imani's school dismissed in less than an hour, and those girls would be waiting for her. I sat through the rest of calculus unable to focus on derivatives and limits while my mind raced through possible solutions. Every option involved me leaving Lincoln Prep without permission, which meant risking disciplinary action right before college application deadlines. But the alternative was letting my little sister get beaten up because I was too scared to break a rule. When the bell rang, I went straight to the main office and asked to speak with Mrs. Valencia, the dean of students who handled disciplinary issues. The secretary said Mrs. Valencia was in a meeting and couldn't be disturbed. I explained it was urgent and involved my sister's safety, and the secretary said I could wait in the chairs by the window until Mrs. Valencia was available. I sat there for 20 minutes watching the clock tick toward 2:30 while my anxiety climbed higher. Finally, I got up and told the secretary I needed to leave campus to help my sister, and she needed to note it was an emergency situation. The secretary looked alarmed and said I couldn't just leave without authorization, and I said I wasn't asking permission anymore. I walked out the front entrance while she called after me that leaving without permission would result in serious consequences. The subway ride to Imani's school took 18 minutes, and I spent the entire time texting her to stay in the nurse's office until I got there. She was terrified and kept asking if I was really coming, or if she'd have to face those girls alone. I promised her I was on my way, and we'd leave together through a side entrance away from where Destiny and her friends were waiting. When I arrived at Imani's school, I checked in at the security desk and explained I was picking up my sister for a family emergency. The security guard asked if I was on her approved pickup list, and I said yes, even though I wasn't sure. He called down to the nurse's office and confirmed that Imani was there, then gave me a visitor badge and pointed toward the stairs. I found Imani still hiding in the nurse's office, her eyes red from crying and her hands shaking. The nurse looked relieved to see me and said she'd been worried about letting Imani leave with those girls waiting outside. We left through a back exit that opened to the faculty parking lot, avoiding the main entrance where Destiny and her crew were supposedly waiting. Imani held my hand tight the whole walk to the subway station, occasionally looking over her shoulder like she expected them to appear and chase us. On the train ride home, she apologized over and over for getting me in trouble, and I told her there was nothing to apologize for. Family came first, and any school that would punish me for protecting my sister wasn't a place I wanted to be anyway. The words sounded braver than I felt. My phone had 3 missed calls from Lincoln Prep's main office and a text from my guidance counselor saying I needed to return immediately. I didn't respond because I was taking Imani home and making sure she was safe before I dealt with whatever consequences were waiting for me. Mom got home from work around 5 and I explained everything that had happened. She was simultaneously grateful I'd helped Imani and terrified about what Lincoln Prep would do to me for leaving without permission. She called the school immediately and got transferred to Mrs. Valencia's voicemail, where she left a long message explaining the emergency situation and asking them to please understand why I'd had to leave campus. Mrs. Valencia called back an hour later, and I listened to Mom's side of the conversation, getting increasingly upset. After she hung up, Mom said I was being suspended pending a disciplinary hearing scheduled for the following week. The suspension would count as unexcused absences, and combined with my unauthorized departure today, I was already at 4 absences for the semester. One more and I'd trigger automatic expulsion proceedings according to the policy handbook. The next morning, I was supposed to stay home on suspension, but Mrs. Valencia called and said I needed to come in to collect my assignments and meet with the disciplinary committee. Mom took the morning off work to come with me, and we sat in the main office waiting for 30 minutes before getting called into a conference room. Mrs. Valencia was there along with Principal Holloway and my guidance counselor, Ms. Fisher. They had my file spread out on the table showing my perfect attendance record for 3.5 years, my GPA, my extracurricular activities. Principal Holloway started by saying he understood I'd been trying to help my sister, but that leaving campus without authorization was a serious violation that they couldn't overlook regardless of circumstances. He said the zero-tolerance attendance policy existed to maintain order and ensure student safety, and making exceptions would undermine the entire system. My mother tried to explain about Imani being threatened and the school refusing to help, but Principal Holloway cut her off and said that wasn't Lincoln Prep's concern. He said I should have followed proper channels by speaking with a counselor or administrator instead of taking matters into my own hands. I pointed out that I'd tried to see Mrs. Valencia and she was unavailable, and that waiting would have meant my sister getting attacked. Mrs. Valencia said that didn't justify leaving campus, and there were always alternatives if I'd been patient enough to find them. The circular logic made me want to scream. They were saying I should have waited for permission that would never have come in time, and when I'd acted to prevent violence, that made me the problem instead of the girls who'd been terrorizing my sister for weeks. The hearing lasted 40 minutes and ended with them informing me I was suspended for 3 days and would be on behavioral probation for the rest of the school year. Any additional infractions would result in immediate expulsion with no appeal process. They gave me a packet of work to complete during my suspension and said all assignments had to be submitted electronically since I wasn't allowed on campus. Ms. Fisher pulled me aside afterward and said she knew I'd been trying to do the right thing, but the rules were the rules and the administration had no flexibility. She suggested I focus on finishing the year without any more incidents, so I could graduate and move on to college. Her tone was sympathetic but ultimately useless because sympathy didn't change the fact that I was being punished for protecting my sister. During my 3-day suspension, I fell behind in calculus and physics because I couldn't ask questions about the material I didn't understand. My teachers sent work electronically, but learning complex concepts through worksheets without any instruction was nearly impossible. I emailed questions and got brief responses that barely clarified anything. My grades started slipping for the first time in 4 years, dropping from A's to B's in my hardest classes. The stress of falling behind combined with worrying about Imani's safety made it hard to focus on anything. Mom had finally gotten a meeting with Imani's school counselor, who promised to monitor the situation but wouldn't commit to any specific actions against Destiny and her friends. The system was failing both of us in different ways. I returned to Lincoln Prep the following week feeling like everyone was staring at me. Word had spread about why I'd been suspended, and reactions were mixed. Some students thought I'd done the right thing and the administration was being too harsh. Others said I should have followed the rules and found another way to help my sister. A few people I thought were friends started avoiding me, probably worried that associating with someone on behavioral probation would reflect badly on them. The social dynamics shifted in subtle ways that made me feel isolated even when I was surrounded by classmates. Lincoln Prep's culture valued compliance and success above everything else, and I'd marked myself as someone who couldn't follow the rules. 2 weeks after I returned from suspension, I got called to the main office during English class. Mrs. Valencia was waiting with a serious expression that made my stomach drop. She said they'd received a report that I'd left campus during lunch period the previous day, and she needed me to explain where I'd gone. My mind went blank with panic because I hadn't left campus at all the previous day. I'd eaten lunch in the cafeteria with my friend Zara and then gone to the library to work on a history paper. Mrs. Valencia pulled up security footage on her computer showing the front entrance, and she pointed to a figure leaving the building during lunch period. The video quality was grainy, but the person did look somewhat like me from behind. I insisted it wasn't me and that I could prove I'd been in the library. But Mrs. Valencia said the footage was clear enough and I needed to admit what I'd done. I asked to see the full footage, including the library cameras that would show me there during lunch, but Mrs. Valencia said that would take time to pull and she needed an answer now. The whole situation felt like a setup, and I couldn't understand why they were accusing me of something I hadn't done. I refused to confess to leaving campus because it wasn't true, and Mrs. Valencia said my refusal to take responsibility was disappointing given my previous violation. She gave me an official notice that I was being written up for leaving campus without permission, which would be my second major violation while on probation. One more strike and I'd face expulsion proceedings. I left the office shaking with anger and fear because they were pushing me toward expulsion based on footage that didn't actually show my face clearly. Zara confirmed she'd had lunch with me and that I'd been in the library afterward, and she offered to write a statement for my file. I also asked the librarian if she remembered seeing me, and she said she thought so but couldn't be completely certain because she'd been helping several students that period. The lack of definitive proof besides Zara's testimony left me vulnerable to whatever narrative the administration wanted to construct. I started to suspect they were looking for reasons to expel me because I'd become a problem student who questioned their authority. The scholarship student who'd been grateful and compliant for 3.5 years had revealed herself to be someone who'd prioritize family over institutional rules, and that made me dangerous to their carefully controlled environment. My mother hired a lawyer after the second write-up, a woman named Octavia Reeves who specialized in education law. She reviewed my file and the security footage and said the evidence against me was weak, but charter schools had broad authority to enforce their disciplinary policies. She filed an appeal on my behalf arguing that the footage was inconclusive and that my stellar record should count for something. The appeal process would take weeks, and in the meantime, I had to continue attending school while knowing that one more accusation, true or false, would end my education at Lincoln Prep. The stress made me paranoid about every move I made on campus, constantly worried that someone was watching and looking for violations to report. In January, Imani's situation escalated again, when Destiny and 2 other girls jumped her in the school bathroom and beat her badly enough to require a hospital visit. Imani had a black eye, bruised ribs, and cuts on her face from where they'd scratched her. The school suspended all 3 girls for 5 days but refused to expel them despite the severity of the attack. Mom filed a police report, but the officers said it was a school matter and suggested we pursue disciplinary action through the school system. The same system that had ignored weeks of threats and done nothing to protect my sister was now claiming 5 days suspension was appropriate punishment for assault. I wanted to pull Imani out and homeschool her myself, but Mom couldn't afford to quit her jobs and I had my own education hanging by a thread. The attack on Imani happened on a Thursday afternoon, and by Friday morning, everyone at Lincoln Prep had heard about it through the student gossip network. Several classmates approached me to say they were sorry and ask if Imani was okay. During lunch, I was sitting with Zara when my phone rang with a call from Mom. She was at the hospital with Imani for a follow-up appointment because the doctors were concerned about her ribs. Mom asked if I could pick up Imani's homework from her school and bring it to the apartment since Imani would be staying home for a few days to recover. I told Mom I'd handle it after Lincoln Prep dismissed for the day, but she said she needed it sooner because Imani was worried about falling behind. The school had told Mom the homework would be ready by noon, and she couldn't get there herself because she had to go directly from the hospital to her evening shift. I looked at the clock and saw it was 11:30. I could potentially leave during lunch, take the subway to Imani's school, pick up the homework, and be back before my next class at 1:15. It would be tight timing, but possible if everything went smoothly. The alternative was telling my mother I couldn't help because I was afraid of getting in trouble, which felt impossible after watching my sister get beaten up because adults kept failing to protect her. I told Mom I'd get the homework and bring it home that evening. I didn't mention I'd be leaving Lincoln Prep to do it because I knew she'd tell me not to risk it. But Imani needed those assignments, and I was the only person available to get them. I signed out at the security desk saying I had a doctor's appointment and would be back before 5th period. The security guard asked if I had a note from the office, and I said Mrs. Valencia had approved it that morning. He wrote down my name and the time, and I walked out hoping he wouldn't verify my lie before I got back. The subway was running slow due to track work, and what should have been an 18-minute trip took almost 30 minutes. I was already cutting it close on time when I finally reached Imani's school. The secretary at the front desk had Imani's homework packet ready, and I grabbed it and immediately headed back to the subway station. My phone showed 12:55, and I needed to be back at Lincoln Prep by 1:15 to avoid being marked absent for 5th period. The train sat in the station for 10 minutes before finally moving, and I watched the clock tick past 1 o'clock, then 1:10, then 1:15. I wasn't going to make it back in time. I texted my 5th period teacher saying I was running late from a medical appointment, and she responded that I needed an excuse note from the office to avoid being marked absent. I got off at my stop and ran the 3 blocks to Lincoln Prep, arriving at 1:35, 20 minutes late to class. I went straight to the security desk to sign back in, and the guard looked at his log and said Mrs. Valencia wanted to see me immediately. My heart sank because I knew exactly what this meant. Mrs. Valencia's office was on the 2nd floor, and I climbed the stairs with legs that felt like concrete. She was waiting at her desk with my file open, and her expression set in disappointed neutrality. She said the security guard had checked with the office about my supposed doctor's appointment and found no approval on record. She asked where I'd really gone, and I explained about picking up my sister's homework while she was recovering from being assaulted. Mrs. Valencia said that didn't constitute an approved absence and that I'd lied to school security, which was a separate violation on top of leaving campus without permission. She pulled out another write-up form and began filling it out while I sat there watching my future disappear. This was my 3rd major violation while on probation, which meant automatic expulsion proceedings. I tried to argue that Imani's situation was an emergency, and I was the only one who could help, but Mrs. Valencia said I'd been explicitly told after my suspension that any additional infractions would result in expulsion. She said the administration had shown me leniency by allowing me to remain enrolled after the first incident, and I'd repaid that leniency by continuing to violate policies. Her framing made it sound like I was deliberately defiant rather than a student trying to help her injured sister. I asked if there was any way to appeal or explain the circumstances, and she said the policy was clear and didn't allow for exceptions based on personal situations. She scheduled an expulsion hearing for the following week and said I was suspended immediately until the hearing took place. I called my mother from the hallway outside Mrs. Valencia's office, and she started crying before I even finished explaining what happened. She said she never should have asked me to pick up the homework, and this was all her fault for putting that burden on me. I told her it wasn't her fault, and that I'd made the choice knowing the risks. But hearing her blame herself made the situation feel even worse because none of this should have come down to impossible choices between helping family and following school rules. The system had failed us at every level, and now I was paying the price for trying to hold things together when the adults around us couldn't or wouldn't help. Octavia Reeves reviewed the new violations and said my case had gotten significantly harder to defend. 3 separate incidents of leaving campus created a pattern that the school could point to as justification for expulsion, even if each individual incident had reasonable explanations. She said we could argue selective enforcement and lack of consideration for mitigating circumstances, but charter schools had wide discretion in disciplinary matters. The expulsion hearing would be my last chance to present my side, and even if I gave a compelling testimony, the decision ultimately rested with administrators who'd already demonstrated they valued rule enforcement over student well-being. The odds were against me, but we'd prepare the strongest defense possible and hope the hearing panel showed some humanity. The week before my hearing, I couldn't sleep more than a few hours each night. I kept replaying every decision wondering if I could have done something differently. Should I have let Imani face those girls alone the first time? Should I have refused to pick up her homework and forced my mother to figure out another solution? The guilt of those hypotheticals mixed with anger at a system that had put me in positions where there were no good choices. I drafted and redrafted my statement for the hearing, trying to find words that would make them understand without sounding like I was making excuses. Octavia helped me focus on facts and timelines rather than emotions, but how do you remove emotion from explaining why you chose to protect your sister? The expulsion hearing took place in the school conference room on a Friday morning. Principal Holloway chaired the panel along with Mrs. Valencia and 2 school board members I'd never met before. My mother and Octavia sat on either side of me while they reviewed the case file aloud, listing each violation and the dates they occurred. Hearing it presented that way made me sound like a chronic rule breaker, rather than someone dealing with family emergencies. They gave me 20 minutes to present my defense, and I read my statement with my voice shaking. I explained about Imani being bullied and threatened, about her school refusing to protect her, about my mother working 2 jobs and not being able to leave work during school hours. I presented documentation of the threats Imani had received and photos of her injuries after the assault. I talked about being a straight-A student with college acceptances and how expelling me would destroy opportunities I'd worked 4 years to earn. When I finished, Principal Holloway thanked me for my statement and said they understood I'd been in difficult situations. But he reiterated that Lincoln Prep's attendance policy existed to maintain standards and that allowing me to stay would send a message that rules could be ignored if students had good enough reasons. One of the board members asked if I understood why my actions were problematic regardless of my intentions, and I said I understood they violated policy, but that protecting my sister had to take priority over attendance rules. That answer seemed to disappoint them, as if I was supposed to say I'd been wrong to help my family. The hearing ended with them saying they'd deliberate and send their decision in writing within 3 business days. Those 3 days felt like 3 years. I couldn't focus on anything except checking my email and mailbox constantly for the decision letter. My college acceptances were contingent on graduating from high school, and getting expelled would invalidate everything I'd worked for. I'd applied to scholarships that required proof of graduation, lined up housing at my chosen university, and told everyone I knew about my plans. All of it hung in the balance while 4 people decided whether my family emergencies justified my rule violations. Zara texted me constantly with messages of support, and several classmates reached out saying they'd signed a petition asking the school to reconsider, but I knew student opinions wouldn't matter if the administration wanted me gone. The letter arrived on a Wednesday afternoon in a thin envelope that made my hands shake before I even opened it. The decision was formatted in official letterhead with numbered paragraphs that laid out their reasoning. They acknowledged my academic achievements and the difficult circumstances surrounding my violations, but concluded that the pattern of unauthorized absences demonstrated an inability to prioritize school obligations appropriately. Therefore, the panel had voted to uphold the expulsion effective immediately. I would not be allowed to complete my senior year at Lincoln Prep or participate in graduation ceremonies. The school would provide my transcript showing coursework completed through the date of expulsion, and I could pursue completing my diploma through alternative education programs or GED testing. The formal language couldn't hide what this really meant. 4 years of work destroyed, college plans uncertain, and a permanent record that would follow me forever. My mother held me while I cried for hours that evening. She kept apologizing and saying she should have found a way to help Imani without involving me, but we both knew there hadn't been realistic alternatives. Our family was barely functioning with everyone stretched too thin, and when emergencies happened, we dealt with them using whatever resources we had available. That had always meant me stepping up to help however I could, and this time it had cost me everything. The unfairness of it burned in my chest, making it hard to breathe. Students at schools with more resources had parents who could leave work for emergencies or money to pay for help. I hadn't had those options, and the system had punished me for being poor and having family responsibilities they deemed inconvenient. Octavia filed an appeal with the state education department citing discriminatory enforcement and failure to accommodate family circumstances, but she warned that the process could take months and had low chances of success. Charter schools operated under different rules than traditional public schools, and oversight was minimal. In the meantime, I needed to figure out how to finish my senior year and salvage my college plans. The local public school said they could accept me as a transfer student, but I'd be behind on credits and might not graduate on time with my original class. The alternative was studying for the GED and trying to explain to colleges why I had an equivalency diploma instead of a traditional graduation. Neither option was what I'd imagined 4 years ago when I'd worked so hard to get accepted to Lincoln Prep. I enrolled at the neighborhood public school in February and tried to adjust to an environment completely different from Lincoln Prep's controlled atmosphere. The classrooms were overcrowded, the building was falling apart, and security was focused more on preventing violence than enforcing attendance policies. Students came and went during class periods without permission, and teachers seemed too overwhelmed to track everyone. The contrast was jarring after years of hypervigilance about every minute of my schedule. My new guidance counselor reviewed my transcript from Lincoln Prep and said I needed 3 more credits to graduate, which I could potentially earn by taking night classes and online courses. It would be tight, but possible if I stayed focused. My college acceptances remained valid since I was still on track to graduate, though the universities wanted updated transcripts showing my completion of requirements. I had to draft explanations about my transfer to a different school, and I tried to frame it neutrally without revealing I'd been expelled. The incomplete story felt dishonest, but admitting the full truth seemed too risky when colleges could rescind their offers. My scholarship prospects were more complicated because several required letters from teachers at my graduating school, and I barely knew any teachers at my new school. The financial aid packages I'd been counting on started to fall apart as various requirements became impossible to meet in my new situation. Imani struggled with guilt about my expulsion even though I kept telling her it wasn't her fault. She blamed herself for needing help and felt responsible for destroying my future. I tried to explain that the school had destroyed my future by refusing to show flexibility, but she couldn't separate her needs from my consequences. She started having anxiety attacks and trouble sleeping, and her grades dropped as she dealt with both the trauma of being assaulted and the guilt of what happened to me. Our mother took her to a therapist who specialized in adolescent trauma, and slowly Imani started to understand that the adults in charge had failed both of us. The system was broken, and we'd been caught in its gears. I graduated from the public school in June with a diploma that felt both like an achievement and a reminder of everything I'd lost. There was no ceremony for summer graduates, just picking up the diploma from the office on a random Thursday afternoon. No cap and gown, no walking across the stage, no family taking photos. My mother tried to make it special by taking me to dinner afterward, but the celebration felt hollow. I should have been graduating with my Lincoln Prep class, the students I'd spent 4 years with, wearing the school colors and giving speeches about our bright futures. Instead, I was alone with a piece of paper that said I'd completed minimum requirements. My college plans survived in a reduced form. I ended up at a state school with a partial scholarship that didn't cover nearly as much as the package I'd originally been offered. I took out loans to cover the gap and worked part-time throughout my first semester to help with expenses. The campus felt huge and impersonal compared to Lincoln Prep's intimate environment, and I struggled to find my place among students who'd had traditional senior years and graduation experiences. When people asked about my high school, I'd give vague answers about transferring schools and changing plans, never quite admitting that I'd been expelled for helping my sister. Octavia's appeal with the state education department was denied after 8 months of review. The decision letter said that while my circumstances were sympathetic, the charter school had acted within its authority to enforce its attendance policies. The denial meant there would be no overturning of my expulsion, no clearing of my record, no official acknowledgement that the school had been wrong. The finality of it was devastating, even though I'd already moved on with my life. I'd wanted someone in authority to say that what happened to me was unjust, that I shouldn't have been forced to choose between my education and my sister's safety. Instead, the system validated the school's decision and told me I should have followed their rules regardless of consequences. Years later, I still think about what I would have done differently knowing how things turned out. Would I let Imani face those girls alone to preserve my perfect record? Would I refuse to pick up her homework and tell my mother I couldn't help? Honestly, I don't think I could have made different choices even knowing the cost. Family has to come first when nobody else is going to help. And rules that don't account for human complexity aren't rules worth following. But but understanding that intellectually doesn't erase the anger I feel about what was taken from me. I earned my spot at Lincoln Prep through hard work and dedication, and they threw me away the moment I became inconvenient. The experience taught me that institutional rules often protect institutions rather than the people they're supposed to serve. Lincoln Prep cared more about maintaining their zero-tolerance policy than considering why a student might need flexibility during family emergencies. They cared more about appearing strict and ordered than acknowledging that poor students have responsibilities wealthier students don't face. The policy looked fair on paper because it applied equally to everyone, but equal application of rules isn't the same as justice when students start from unequal positions. I had family responsibilities that students with more resources could outsource to paid help, and when I couldn't outsource them, the school punished me for being poor. I finished my undergraduate degree with good grades despite the financial stress and the emotional weight of everything that had happened. I went on to graduate school studying education policy because I wanted to understand the systems that had failed me and figure out how to change them. My research focused on how zero-tolerance policies disproportionately affect students from low-income families and students of color, and how charter schools use strict behavioral codes to push out students who don't fit their model student image. The patterns I found in the data reflected my own experience replicated across thousands of schools. Students getting expelled for family emergencies, for poverty-related absences, for failing to conform to rigid expectations that assumed everyone had the same resources and support systems. I connected with other students who'd been expelled from charter schools for similar reasons, and their stories sounded depressingly familiar. Parents who couldn't leave work, siblings who needed care, family emergencies that happened during school hours when help wasn't available. All of them had tried to follow proper channels and been told there were no exceptions to policy. All of them had made split-second decisions to help family members and paid with their education. The common thread was schools that valued compliance over compassion and used discipline to maintain their carefully curated success statistics. Students who didn't fit the model got pushed out, and schools pointed to their high graduation rates as proof of effectiveness while ignoring everyone they'd expelled along the way. Imani graduated from high school and went to community college to study nursing. She still carries guilt about my expulsion, even though I've told her 1,000 times it wasn't her fault. She works with teens who've experienced trauma and tells them about what happened to us, using our story to help them understand that asking for help is okay even when adults fail to provide it. She's turned her pain into purpose in ways that make me incredibly proud, and she understands now that the problem was never her needs, but a system that refused to accommodate those needs in humane ways. My mother still works 2 jobs, but talks about our experience with other parents who have kids in strict charter schools. She warns them about zero-tolerance policies and helps them understand what questions to ask before enrolling their children. She joins me at community meetings about education reform, and she speaks powerfully about watching her daughter get expelled for being a sister when nobody else could help. Her English is still imperfect, but her message is crystal clear. Schools should support families, not punish students for having families that need support. I teach now at a progressive high school that explicitly rejects zero-tolerance policies in favor of restorative practices and individualized support. When students come to me with family emergencies, I help them figure out solutions that don't require choosing between education and family. I keep extra supplies in my classroom for students whose families can't afford them, and I write letters of recommendation that tell the whole story of who students are beyond their grades and test scores. I refuse to participate in systems that push out students for being fully human with complex lives outside school walls. Appreciate you watching this far. If you enjoyed it, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story.